Good morning and welcome to today's Drought Hour. My name is Connie Strunk and I'm a plant pathology field specialist with SDSU Extension, and I will be your host and moderator. If you have questions or comments throughout today's presentation, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A or the chat feature and we will address them as they come up. But I'll take this time to introduce our speaker, Dr. David Karki. He is a colleague and friend of mine, and he'll be talking about the cover crops and some do's and don'ts and some things to think about. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Karki.
Thank you, Connie. Let me share my screen here quick. Is that looking okay?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Connie, for that introduction. I'm very glad to be here, and thank you for inviting me for the presentation this morning. Like my colleague Connie said, my name is David Karki. I'm an SDSU Extension Agronomy Field Specialist based out of Watertown Regional Extension Office. And as the season progressed, I think, this is the good time to talk about cover crops. So I will try to provide a brief, outlook on what are the things we can do in South Dakota and the surrounding regions, and the upper Midwest. Starting from the, very basic here, this is the picture I liked. And if you have, heard me talk in the past, you probably have seen this picture, one of my best pictures of cover crops in South Dakota. This is taken at the Southeast Research Farm by Dr. Peter Sexton. And here's the simplest definition of cover crops that I stole from Midwest Cover Crop Council's website. And there's a couple of things, I liked, so I underlined those words. Cover crops are just plants seeded into agricultural fields, either within or outside of the regular growing season. And the primary purpose of improving or maintaining ecosystem quality. And it doesn't say anything about the yield increase or any kind of short-term benefits or the drawbacks. It's more like over long-term, how to improve our ecological, how to improve our farming system ecologically. And I'm sure you've heard about cover crops, more so in last maybe 7 to 10 years than you had ever before. And there are certain reasons, why now we have gotten into this cover crop world, because in science we try to learn things every day, and there are new things to learn every day. Thus, we last 10 years or so we're trying to learn. I don't think we have achieved much, but we're trying to learn, how to get the cover crops going in our system. And there are a few things that has been proven or documented by our scientists and other scientists in the nation, in the world, actually. So why use cover crops? You can get into any kind of order, but the diversity is one of the major things I think we need in our cropping system. So cover crop allows us to provide that diversity or incorporate that diversity in our system. And another word we have heard a lot in last 10 years is soil health. And soil health is another, broad term in itself, but cover crop have shown, evidences that it helps enhance your overall soil health. And soil health itself can be, preventing erosion, increasing soil organic matter, enhancing soil structure, water infiltration, and so on and so forth. And there's another element to cover crops now is you can actually use cover crops for forages, actually use it as a commodity in your farm to provide supplemental forage needs. And also nutrient management, if there is any excess nutrient in your soil, cover crops help extract that and absorb that and then convert that to the plant materials. And at the same time, there are some evidences that if you have the right choice of cover crops, it may provide actual nutrients for the subsequent crops. And there's a bunch of, a lot of buzz going on with the carbon market and things like that. But even before the market word came into play, cover crop do provide additional carbon in the soil or carbon sequestration. and enhances water quality, suppression of pest pressure. That means breaking the cycle of the pest, and could be many more. We can get this list, make even longer. However, there's one thing in cover crops management is the objective of individual farm, and one or more of the above, these things in the list can be your objective. And objective always have to be in the mind when we're trying to manage or our cover crops in our system. So that's more of an introduction. Now, these are the things that relates to South Dakota in particular. We have two major cropping systems. One is, of course, corn and soybean rotation, mostly seen in the eastern part of the state. Ground cover, give or take, we may be able to cover our ground in corn soybean rotation from, late April to November, planting early, going into late. And another system we have is small grain based system. If we have small grains, then we can have, our ground cover from, again, give or take from March to August. But other times there are not much, going on in terms of having a live plants or living system in your soil in other times beside these months. And corn soybean rotation, due to our northern climate, kind of short growing season, to have anything incorporated in terms of cover crops between corn and soybean rotation is more challenging because of the short growing window in the fall after the crops are taken out. And so that kind of gets tricky how you select your cover crop species. Now you have very limited options, and probably have to select from those that are tolerant to our cooler temperatures up north. And another thing could be in-season establishment. That means growing cover crops and your cash crop at the same time. That could be an option also. And again, objectives is critical. Objectives could be still the same: soil health, forages, or etc. And I would like to, I don't have it in the slide, but I would like to mention this. A few years ago, 2 years in a row during our winter meetings, I did a survey targeting, general agronomy audience, not the audience that came to the meeting just for cover crops, but it was more of a general agronomy crop production meeting. And we did a survey, and that result of that survey showed that majority of the participants wanted to grow cover crops for two main reasons. Soil health, number one, and the other one was the forages. And 50% of the attendees all, mentioned that they had already practiced some sort of cover crops in their system. And half of the other 50%, left over other 50%, said they will do that or incorporate cover crops in their system in the next 5 years. So that is very encouraging. And these surveys are done, if I remember right, it must have been, winter of 2016 and 2017. And corn soybean rotation is species that can overwinter is important through while selecting cover crops. And cereal rye or winter rye has been the go-to cover crops for not only for South Dakota corn soybean rotation folks, but the whole Midwest has been going after rye for some time now. And there are two ways we can incorporate rye or plant rye in our corn soybean system. It's flying or broadcasting, and on corn works better. I'll tell you why in a little bit. On corn at physiological maturity, which is give or take right now, first week of September, when the leaves started, dropping down and opening up the canopy again in corn, that's a time to broadcast cereal rye if you were to plant cereal rye in corn, after corn and before beans. And rotationally fits better before soybean, because soybean kind of is forgiving for late planting if that happens in the spring, and that'll allow the rye to grow a little longer. And in the spring, rye can be, or the biomass that rye puts on, that can be used for soil cover or just terminated as is, or grazed or hay, or even chopped. And some of the things, some of the studies that we've been involved, there's no documentation of negative impact or negative effects in soybean that follows rye cover crop in yield. And here's a picture that's taken, in 2015. On your left, you'll see the aerial seeded rye on September 18th of 2015. And the picture was taken, these little growth rye seedlings you can see on the ground, and the picture was taken after about a month in October. And the same field happened like this after the corn was harvested, looked like this in 2016, April 26th or end of April. And seeding rate for this aerial seeded or airplane flown in rye at that time was 40 pounds per acre. Would like to mention another thing, if and there is no real, a number, but usually we recommend 35 to 40 pounds if somebody was to plant cereal rye, drilled or aerially seeded, for cover crop. I mean, for just the soil cover. But if you want to go for, a little more biomass because of grazing in the spring, you can always increase it to 60, 65, even 70 pounds. And there are folks who like to grow rye, suppress tough weeds in soybean the next season. And at that time, you can go even higher, up to 70, 75 pounds. And just to keep in mind that if you want to grow cereal rye for grain, which isn't a cover crop, but the grain crop, then the seeding rate goes to 100 to 110 pounds, or 2 bushel, and a bushel of rye is 56 pounds. And I would like to show some data from a study that were done back in 2012, 13, and 13, 14 growing seasons at the SDSU Southeast Research Farm by Beresford. And at that time, we didn't have much numbers or the scientific numbers that was done in our environment. That's why this study was initiated. But now, in last 7, 8 years, we have more numbers to look at. And there are 2 seeding methods: broadcast on corn at physiological maturity, or first week of September type time frame, and drill immediately after grain harvest. And rye biomass was measured in the following spring at heading stage when the head was just about to pop out. And soybeans were planted following rye cover crop the next season, and yields were determined for cover crops, and there were check plots which didn't have any cover crops. We tried to compare soybean yields between the rye treated plots and no rye plots. And we added another variable to this corn season, or the season prior. I'll show you in the next slide, which is a little interesting. There are now the numbers coming now. So on the very left column, you see 75-day corn, 86-day corn, 96-day corn, and 105-day corn. And Beresford, South Dakota is recommended for 105-day corn. The reason we wanted to go with early corn is when we broadcast or drill and give some more time for rye to grow in the fall, can we compensate the yield loss, if there is any yield loss, the next, for corn, in comparing with the biomass. And here are the numbers you can see. The highest number we see is the drilled after 75-day corn, but not that much different if you compare it to other ones. And I don't have corn yield in this slide. However, there's quite a bit of corn yield decrease for the early maturing corn, and we don't really suggest to go with early corn. But this was an experiment, so we wanted to try it out. And another thing that very interesting that's in the very last column on the right side is the numbers that's inside that little blue squares. And soybean yield in 2014, in control plots, we have 43 bushel, some numbers, realistic number in the control plots, but we didn't have any realistic soybean yield numbers for the other rye treated plots, broadcast or drill. And the reason behind that is 2014 June, when we're out there taking rye biomass sample, it was early June, real early June, and the whole month of June was so wet. Beresford received the historic amount of rain for the month of June, or highest amount of rain for any month ever recorded in the station. So we couldn't really go out and sample our our rye for the whole month of June, and we end up planting beans just to plant it and see what happens in mid-July. But the control plots, we didn't have rye. We didn't have to sample any biomass in those plots. So those were planted in a decent time, really late, very, very, very early June, before the rain started coming down. So this is not due to rye, it's because due to planting date variability. And 2013 soybean bushel almost identical for all the control plots, broadcast plots, drill plots. So there is no drag or yield drag in soybean by preceding rye cover crop. And in the same year, 2012, and I was almost going to skip this slide, but I thought 2012 was very similar, or 2021, this year, this growing season was very similar to what 2012 looked like. And these are a lot simpler experiment, yes, no type thing, and compare the yield. You can see that in the slide. So Crooks, South Dakota, which is usually a lot better than 35 bushel corn, 35 bushel soybean environment, but did only 35, and then control and winter rye treated plots looked almost identical. So there is no difference between the soybean yield and control plots and winter rye plots. Same thing but if you look at Arlington, South Dakota, 2012 was a drought year, extremely dry year, an extremely dry spring, but somehow Arlington, South Dakota got every little bit of rain that went through our state. They're lucky enough that the site Arlington was lucky enough to get those rains, and then soybean yields were a lot higher than the rest of the state, almost the whole South Dakota that year. But in Arlington, we had winter wheat as a cover crop, rye as a cover crop, triticale as a cover crop, and control. There was no cover crop at all. And you can see the yield numbers, soybean yield numbers on the right column. And this is something you probably don't want to see rye in western South Dakota, where there's a lot of wheat country out there. But a colleague of mine, you probably know him. His name is Dr. Chris Graham. He's our agronomist for West River, and he did some, and there's some talk or demand for forage wheat, and then his team wanted to try out, when we're trying out wheat for forage, why not throw in another rye and triticale as a comparison. So this year's and winter wheat was Willow Creek forage winter wheat, and you can see the total dry weight that was at the boot stage for wheat, and then in anthesis, that means flowering stage for wheat rye, total dry weight rye was a lot better than winter wheat and triticale. And harvest moisture is about anywhere from 75 to 80% moisture, and crude protein was better for the winter wheat or Willow Creek, and of course that's why it's bred for, the breeding was done in the winter for Willow Creek was for forages. And ADF, you may already know this, lower the ADF, better the quality, you can see in winter wheat, and then TDN, higher the TDN, better the forage quality. So this is just a comparison between rye, wheat, and triticale. Those are the three overwintering cereal species that we usually have access to or can survive in our winter. So I wanna switch gear a little bit, but not too alarming. I don't want anybody to get too alarmed from this slide or next few slides, I should say. I just said there's no yield impact in soybean after following winter rye, but I'm going to contradict my own statement a little bit here. So these were the two soybean plants around, right at that flowering stage. The shorter one is where the rye was planted as cover crops before soybean crop, and the other one was control. And the plants looked a little shorter, didn't look that happy, so I pulled them out, kind of measuring just the height or the physical look of it. And this is 2017 north of Madison. Okay. So I did that, pulled plants in few other places, and then I took some samples, and what's going on? So I sent it to the lab, and this is the nutrient analysis, plant tissue analysis, and these are the numbers that came. So 2 stars. So with rye and without rye, soybean plants were sent, and sulfur looked a little off or significantly different between the two. The most significant among other nutrients that are compared, and NS means non-significant at all. So sulfur could be something there. So this is 2017. So this is 2018. So at the Southeast Research Farm, there was a plot, but by chance happened to be the rye that was killed or terminated really late, and then there's rye that's terminated 2 weeks before planting soybeans. And then also their nearby field, this was not the side-by-side comparison, but the comparison with the nearby field is now look at, rye that's killed 2 weeks before planting soybeans, and no rye plot and late killed rye. And then biomass at R3 soybean stage, late kill rye had a soybean, the tonnage, a lot lesser than other two, and height, but difference in biomass and difference in didn't really translate to yield. When you look at the yield, early kill rye had 64 bushel, then no rye had 63, and late kill rye had 62. Statistically, this could be just an error. This is not even it's not going to come out as a significantly different numbers. So same thing here. We send out the sample at R3 stage, and this is what came, sulfur again. So, when we're trying to explore new things every day, these things come, and like I said, you don't have to be too alarmed by it, because soybean really doesn't get, the yield of soybean doesn't look like it's going to get hit by the preceding rye crop. But if your soil is deficient in sulfur, or you had some sulfur deficiency in soil, or low soil test level, that's something to keep in mind. And there is another study that was done, rye termination date. So what's the right time to terminate rye, and what does it do in terms of sulfur tie-up or any other nutrient tie-up? So, and then there's a Ben Brockmuller did a master's study in this, did his master's in this study. This was his main project. So he had 5 different termination dates, which are 19th April, 29th, 13th, so kind of like a 10-day difference all the way up to 31st of May. And these are the major nutrients, NPK and sulfur, that was measured in soybean growth stage, and on August 5th, kind of like R3 growth stage, and then August 30th was R6 growth stage. And we're looking at about 3 pounds of sulfur tie-up. But again, if you look at the yield, actually the plots where the rye was killed on 31st May had 72 bushel, the highest yield. And these yields that ranged from 67 bushel to 72 bushel didn't really, they were not statistically significant. And another question I get, when we're talking about rye, is why not follow corn after rye? And this picture was taken in 2018 in Arlington, South Dakota. Now you can see the rye residue in between corn rows on the left, and there is a dashed red line in between, and anything on the right side of that line in my slide right now corn looks greener and corn looks taller. And that part of the field, the rye was killed 3 weeks before planting corn. And on the left, where you see a lot of rye residue, that rye was terminated after the corn was emerged from the ground. So after about 7 days after planting. So we let the rye keep growing, all the way up to week after planting. And this picture was taken in June, late June, and the plants were pulled mid-July, somewhere in there. And on the bottom, there's a couple of statements you can see. Corn from rye cover crop killed 3 weeks prior to planting versus, that's the yield difference between corn that's, rye was killed 3 weeks before planting corn versus, after emergence was about 38 bushel. And you don't want to have that. And main points from these two, one was the replicated study, other one was more of observations. Main points to take home message is winter rye after corn and before soybean works for spring biomass or ground cover, but there's caveat. If there's a spring like this year's 2021 spring or 2012 spring, and the weather, the winter is dry and weather outlook looks in a drier side, when you come to April, you may want to go out and terminate the rye cover crop at your earliest convenience. And that's something that we need to. That's an extra management variable that rye adds to your system. And soybean yield in our study, we didn't see any yield impact from rye. And planting earlier maturing corn for establishing rye in the fall, and that did not pay off well. And observations show that corn after winter rye cover crop is not a viable option in our environment. However, in your system, you want to try out winter rye as a cover crop, and only thing you want to start out this year or the next year right away, and then only thing that works is before corn, then I would still suggest to go ahead and plant rye. But when you're terminating it, give it at least 10 to 14 days period for the rye to be killed completely before you plant your corn. And another study, this was not in South Dakota, but in Minnesota. This was more targeted for silage, corn and corn silage folks out there. And the authors of this study looked at nitrate N, how much nitrate the rye would take, from the ground, and also, what the biomass or what the silage, tonnage would be towards the end of the season. And they had 3 treatments. That's no rye at all, rye killed 3 weeks before planting, and rye hayed 2 days before planting. So hayed rye is the one that's allowed to grow until the end, until towards the planting date. And these numbers are from megagram per hectare because I pulled these tables from a scientific journal. But either way, if you look at it, biomass yield for control, where they didn't have rye, is way more than harvested rye. And N concentration and N content also, this rye does take N, extra N that's in the ground, but it's impacting corn yield or the biomass yield or silage yield, whichever way we want to say it. The harvested rye had negative impact. I mean, the biomass was a lot lesser. And this is kind of take home message, if you want to do rye before corn, again, allow at least 2 weeks, 10 to 14 days time before planting. And I think for corn and soybean rotation, so far cereal rye has been the go-to cover crops growth-wise. Even though you don't see a whole lot of growth, even it's planted late in the fall, it still grows in the spring. The rate of growth in the spring is very high for rye, which is a good thing if you want to have a residue. It has shown a lot of promise after corn, before soybeans. However, what do we do after soybeans? That we haven't really cracked that nut yet. But there's something called winter camelina. And we tried this after soybeans last fall. And if you remember it, we had already started going into drought or moisture deficit conditions last fall already. So there are places we tried where there was no moisture at all in the ground and no fall growth. And we didn't have a whole lot of snow cover to protect winter species, but camelina did come back, in the spring. So there's some promise that we will give it a shot again this year in different locations. This is small camelina plants that you see in the residue here, green plants poking through. This is picture taken on April 14th of this year, near Mount Vernon. And here is Minnehaha County. That's week, so almost 3 weeks after the first picture. So like I said, we'll give it a try this year again. See if we get more growth and more consistency in growth. After soybeans before corn. And in my first slide, I talked about two different, cropping system, corn, soybean, and small grain based. And we all know, small grain gets harvested, late July, early August, and we have more window in the growing season for cover crop species to grow and put biomass and put, so the growth, and then also the chance of getting rain is higher also. So feasibility wise, it works great after small grains. And questions we get is what kind of species to plant. It depends on what type of the year you're in when you're planting your cover crops. Is mid-July, late July, early August. That kind of gives you an idea on do we target for cool season species. It will be mostly cool season species, but do we go a little more on a warm season side also, some of the species? Two broad categories, if we want to divide cover crops as a whole, of course, broadleaf or dicots and grasses. And even within broadleaves and within grasses, we have cool season, that means plants that like cooler nights, cooler weather, something like today or last couple of days that we're having. These species love that. And warm season would be, in a legume warm season would be cowpea, mung bean type thing. And you have grasses like, millet, sorghum sudan, teff grass, etc. would be your warm season species, and cool season would be wheat, rye, oat, barley, triticale, and brassicas, radish, turnip, and peas and lentils. And objectives have to be always in our minds when we're trying to incorporate cover crops in our system. Is it just for soil cover? Is it for forages? Is it for maybe there are folks who don't want too much residue in the ground. So there's a fiber content in the plant that forms more carbon and more residue. So there are a few things to look think about. Management wise, what kind of equipment do you have? What time of the year you're in? Are we trying to get something that will winter kill in our environment versus or do we want a couple of species like cereal rye in the system that will actually overwinter then and add some extra variable to manage in the spring? Maybe you don't want that. There are things to think about the species selection. And plant morphology, counter compaction, some of the root system that helps a lot in breaking compaction. Physiological, we all living organisms have some kind of physiological makeup. And if there's something in the salinity, these are just example that we can see in our system, in our environment, is salinity has been a problem. Is there plants like sugar beets you want to put in a cover crop mix for those areas? And growth habit, I think that's overwintering versus winter kill. So that's pretty straightforward. And if you're going for forages or if you're going for residue or the accumulation of biomass, after small grains, generally blends have done really well in terms of how much dry matter you're going to receive or achieve. And again, largely depends on moisture, time of the year, and species used. And if it's after small grains harvested, there's some chance that you're going to get volunteer wheat or barley or oats in your field, so that can actually serve as a good component in your cover crop mix. And use blend with more cool season plants if establishing late summer, early fall. And a growing degree day, and after small grain, it works really well because growing degree day in August is almost 3 times that of November. So later you go in the season, less biomass that you will get. Again, we could have some open warm fall also. That all is weather dependent, but traditionally, if somebody asked me today what kind of blend you are gonna have, most maybe just go with the single species that can overwinter, or if it's only for soil cover, it doesn't hurt to throw in some oats and barley and radishes, because those grow until about mid-20s temperature, and after the temperature goes below that, then they'll get killed. And picture here, this year, Minnehaha County, this cover crop, was planted after oats. So that means in about now I have to remember, really, really late July or early August that the oats were harvested. And then and then picture was taken first of this month. And I understand we had, extremely dry June, terribly, warm and dry June. A lot of small grains got, baled, across the state. But some of the ones that got harvested or even baled, because of the rain that we started, coming here and there on and off, in August, and even some in July, depends on which part of the state you're in. And, cover crops that got planted have, shown good establishment that I've seen so far. And this is after small grains last year in Clark County, after spring wheat. And and the picture was taken October 20th, so you can see quite a bit of biomass there also. This was in 2015, near Madison, and this producer had rye, and then that was taken for hay, and cover crop was planted, early summer. They were growing. September 1st picture. This is mainly for forages. He's going to have his cows in this field. And there's another talk out there is, how about full season cover crop for grazing? And this is a picture, this is a part of the experiment that trying to look at, a burn down herbicide. What are the burn down herbicide that can impact some of the common cover crop species that we use in the state? So in this picture, you see, few leaves, like corn looking leaves, in the very front edge of the picture. That's actually sorghum Sudan. And the next one down here, if you can see my cursor, is oats, which didn't like a whole lot of warm weather, because it's a cool season, small grain. And the next to is the soybean looking leaves. Those are actually cowpeas. And of course, these are sunflower, and there is a German millet. And then you go back to this, corn looking plant, that's sorghum Sudan. And these were planted at the Northeast Research Farm, which is 15 miles north of Watertown, on June 28th. And for a while, it didn't look like it's going to come, but the rain helped again, and the picture was taken last week. And then another one is full season, and prevent acres. And we had a lot of prevent acres in 2019, but this picture was taken in Douglas County near Armour, South Dakota, in 2016, because part of the field this producer had was going into prevent. And I think this was supposed to go into corn, had soybean the previous year, so had some nitrogen, and then prevent, plant, they had a lot of moisture, of course. And these were planted in August, actually, August. And picture was taken on October 1st, and then the sampling was done at the same day. And what I did was I walked few paces and then get a representative sample, multiple representative samples, and dried them down, and calculated the dry matter per acre. And these were drilled, and I think we had about 8-way mix, and the dry matter was about 5 ton per acre, which is which is really good. And then the cows went in after November 1st with that, prevent acre policy. And I guess supplemental foraging, extends the grazing season, rest for your pasture. Biomass is your objective usually in grazing, in grazing system, but also quality blend is produces quality forages. You got to keep that also in mind. And when we're grazing cover crops or grazing any kind of plants that's covering your ground, soil health can be another major alternative goal, and it has to be, so that you don't overgraze, exposing your soil and making it prone to anything that that goes against soil health system. And we talk about microbes a lot these days. Different type of soil health parameters out there. People are trying to figure out, is the infiltration, is the organic matter, is this the microbes that's in the ground, and we're trying to measure all of those. And a lot of times in a production system out there, it's hard to get side by side research done or even demonstration sometimes. But luckily there is a field we found back in 2016. So there are two fields, right, the fence line divides. On the right, you see cover crops, grazing, and no-till. On the left, no cover crop, no grazing, conventional till soil. So conventionally tilled field was into alfalfa for 15 years, and that was terminated, and ground was tilled and grown to corn for 2 years. And in 2016 was soybean, and then 2017 spring we went and did the sampling. And then the field 2, the grazing and cover crops were no-till since 1992, diverse cropping system, cover cropped, grazed. And 2016 was winter rye that was taken for haylage, followed by cover crops. And again, the sampling was done in 2017 spring, April. And those samples were taken 100 paces, give or take, from each side from the fence line, and then send it to the lab for a soil microbial test. And cover crop grazed microbial biomass is 3,800 nanograms per grams of soil. No cover crops is 1,900. And you can see the bacteria biomass, fungi biomass, and arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, or AMF, is another important thing that help the plant roots tie up, get a connection with roots and extract the deep profile nutrients and supply to the plants. So this is the number that we got that year. So there is a good amount of benefit if you incorporate livestock, incorporate cover crops, livestock, and no-till system. And when producers are thinking about going into soil health system, no-till probably is one of the major tools, then cover crops, then livestock integration. And we're talking about a very dry year, this year also. And this is the study done by Dr. Sandeep Kumar's lab at SDSU. And there are different producers field across 4 different sites that these measurements were taken. And this is soil infiltration rate. And there's one site in Salem, South Dakota, 2 in Bristol, and 1 in Beresford. And when you see these bars, the blue one is for corn and soybean. Sorry, the blue one was for corn, soybean, small grain cover crops, and grazing. The orange one is for corn and soybean. And pasture, nearby pasture, was as a check, as a reference point, are the gray bars. And soil infiltration, that's inches per hour. You can see how much water that actually went into the ground for pasture system. And of course, the other 2 are way lesser than the pasture system, but cover crops, cover crops and grazing and the diverse crop rotation is still had a lot higher than the corn and soybean. The Beresford looks a little different because Beresford is very young. It wasn't a mature system. It has been in that, cover crops and grazing system only for about 3 years. Yep. And in the same lab, did another experiment in SDSU. These soils were taken from SDSU's different, farms. Used a very unique method, CT scan in soil samples, which is unique. I think it is the first thing, the first crew that did this. And I thought, I would just steal these pictures because it was done in South Dakota. So just to give a quick background, that the green thing that you see in the core of soil sample core are the pore spaces. The whites are the minerals, or whites are the soil. So now you can see in the native pasture how much green or how much pore space there is. And then soil health system, ICLS means integrated crop livestock system, that has little less than native pasture, but more than corn soybean conventional corn soybean rotation. So we're creating this more pores or macropores in our soil that can hold water when it comes down and keeps it in the soil, and then so that our crops can use it when it's needed. So I think that's my last slide. So this is something kind of think about these, this neat pictures of pore spaces in a soil pore tube. And here's my contact information. I think I said it when I introduced myself, but again, I'm based out of Watertown Regional Extension Center, and my phone number down there, office phone number and cell phone number. I don't mind giving out cell phone number because I always have good conversations that way, and easy to get a hold of me, and email address down there also. I think that's the end of my presentation. Now I'll take any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions for David? Well, as people are kind of thinking of questions, Evan, if you could open that poll so we could have folks answer the 2-question poll that we have. If you'd be so kind as to fill out the 2-question poll here, really helps our presenters and us put together educational materials for upcoming programs. Once it looks like enough people have participated in the poll, Evan, go ahead and close it. All right. I see that you have a question that came into the Q&A, David.
Yeah, I can see it now. So the question is about terminating or killing a cover crop, and a chemical versus mechanical, etc. Most of the time, in our wheat-based rotation, folks like to stay away from something like cereal rye that can overwinter and can become a contaminant over time. So most of the species will have a variety of mix, cool season mix, but they will most of the time get winter killed. So that's environmentally killed. And when we have cereal rye and corn soybean rotation for our studies, we've been killing, chemically terminating them, or hayed, in some cases. And mechanical termination is something that's, a lot of times the cover crop enthusiasts or cover crop, folks that like to incorporate cover crops are doing no-till. So, I haven't seen a whole lot of, folks out there kind of killing their cover crops by tilling. However, but there's another way of terminating cover crop, especially in rye world, or cereal rye world, and in the nation, a lot of times states south from us and east from us getting killed crimping cereal rye and then planting soybeans in the same row that you're running your crimper. And I don't know if when you mentioned mechanical, if you meant crimping or you actually meant tilling, but either way, the crimping can kill your rye, but rye has to be well developed into reproductive stage. After jointing, small grains go into reproductive stage, and then when you put external force to bend it down or crimp it down, then likely it'll get terminated that way. And in South Dakota, given the temperature or the climate, I would say southern half or the southeast part of the state probably would be the best. because by the time you come to with your beans, late May, early June, it is likely that your rye would be in that heading stage or so, given a normal year. But you move further north in our state, I don't know if folks want to wait that long for the rye to get into the heading stage and plant their beans, because your cash crop is your your moneymaker is bean, that in that sense. So crimping may not work in the northern half of the state, but southern half, it will probably, most of the time will work. And that's probably the reason I haven't seen a whole lot of crimping in South Dakota, but have seen a lot, in other states, YouTube videos and all that. And I don't know if I answer your question, Susan.
Susan said yes, that you did.
And this kind of conversation, philosophical conversation can go long and long, but, feel free to, grab my phone number and then we can talk more.
Are there any additional questions for David? Well, as people are kind of thinking and hopefully dropping a few things in the chat or the Q&A, I will like to share the CCA CEU credit QR code for those that need that. So I'm going to start that share. But I'm going to have to ask Dr. Karki to stop sharing his screen so I can do that.
I think I did that, right?
Yes. All right. For those of you that are looking to get CCA CEU credits, please grab your mobile device, open up that app, and scan this big QR code on the screen where you can automatically receive your credits. And so I'll just leave that up for a moment or two here. That way folks that need it can grab that QR code, because this will be the only time that the QR code is shown is during this live presentation. All right, well, I'm gonna stop sharing that screen and kind of put out one more call for any questions or comments that you may have for Dr. Karki. I'm not seeing anything come into the Q&A or chat at this time, but if you do have questions, please feel free to reach out to Dr. Karki on email or cell phone like he so graciously shared with y'all. I want to thank you for attending today's session, and we look forward to our Drought Hour series next week and invite you and encourage you to attend that. So with that, I just want to say thank you for tuning in today.